Hey, that's a Soda Pop from Soda Hughes, and you're watching the Malak channel. And today we kind of have a little bit of a weird video that I'm going to do because I've heard a lot about a recent controversy that I actually found kind of interesting because I work in publication design and I love to draw and I collect art books. And this controversy involves drawing books. It involves Jake Parker, the creator of Inktober, and also another big sort of influencer artist, Alphonso Dunn, who has done a ton of YouTube tutorials and has a very substantial following there. According to Alphonso Dunn, he recently posted a video where Jake Parker, he says, plagiarized his book that he published in December of 2015. The video was posted yesterday to Alphonso's verified YouTube account that had 638,000 subscribers, and the video now has 76,000 views and 7.7 thousand likes. In the video, Alphonso directly attacks Jake in multiple instances, accusing him directly of plagiarism. And now Alphonso's many fans have taken to both Instagram and Twitter and really anywhere that Jake's book is shared to attack the book and share multiple comments linking to Alphonso's work and also his video, telling people that they shouldn't buy Jake's book and actually convincing a lot of people to cancel their pre-orders and to actually buy Alphonso's book instead. There's a lot of arguing going on in these comment sections, and some of the things I commonly see are people saying that it's a blatant plagiarization or it's completely obvious that Jake has plagiarized Alphonso's book and must be punished and people shouldn't be buying his book. I watched the entirety of Alphonso's almost hour-long video of an analysis of the comparisons between his book and what he could see of Jake's book. I'm not entirely convinced of plagiarism yet, like Alphonso is. And I think it's important that a lot of things are considered that maybe people don't understand or are ignoring currently. And the fact that there could be a lot of serious implications in the actions that Alphonso took against Jake. And there's probably a lot of people who think, wow, look, here comes some kid to the defense of Jake Parker. But I'm actually not a Jake fan. I met him at an event in 2017, and he actually kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like his attitude, and he also, at the event, was talking about his plans of him wanting to own Inktober, which I thought was a pretty asshole move. And I thought it was just kind of shitty that someone would try and own that entire community event. And my beliefs about that were confirmed when I started hearing stories about his lawyers contacting people to either change or remove their Inktober content. So yeah, I thought that sucked, and I haven't ever bought one of Jake's sketchbooks, and I don't really want to endorse him as an artist ever. That being said, I think these allegations are actually pretty serious, and it's important that we take a logical look at them and try to stay calm and look at the facts that are being presented and what we know about both artists and both books. The first thing I want to talk about is the actual design of both of these books, and I've been seeing a lot of people say that they feel like one of the ways that you can tell that the plagiarism is so blatant is that the layouts are the same. Now, I think a lot of the people who are saying this maybe don't know what a layout is or maybe aren't involved in design. The layout is the way that the content and assets are arranged on the pages. And when we look at the design of both books, I feel like right off the bat I could tell you it would be very difficult for both books to share the same layout, seeing as Alphonso's book has a very strong portrait orientation. It's a portrait format, while Jake's book is a landscape format. It's almost square even. It would be very hard for the layout of those assets to translate the same between both books. Aside from that fact, I feel like there's also, when we analyze the pages closely, you can see a lot of differences in between layouts. For example, the layouts in Jake's book tend to be very rigid, and they also tend to be very balanced and repeating. Jake's book tends to have one or two columns that sort of separate within the page, and that's what creates the layout of that page, with often a centered title. Also, Alphonso's layouts tend to have less breathing room. It seems like a lot of his text is tightly wrapped with the other assets and the examples within the book. Alphonso's book also seems to often leave a very large margin or great empty spaces on one or more sides of the page. But a lot of the people who are mentioning the page layouts being the same, I think also we're maybe talking about the sequence that the content appeared within the books. But before I talk about that, I also want to talk about some of the other design elements, like typography. In Jake's book, he even uses a script font. And I guess it would make sense between the two books because they are effectively using typography to communicate certain ideas, that they're using different weights for the text. Yes, a lot of the headers or titles are larger and heavier than the body or flavor text that's accompanying the assets. However, in Jake's book, he's using a script font for those titles, and also the weight differences are noticeable between the two books. Not to mention the fact that in Jake's book, his text has much more leading that is consistent with even spacing throughout the book compared to Alphonso's book, where a lot of the leading is very tight. And so I feel like even the treatment of type itself is different between the two books. I think it's also interesting to note that the theme of both books is different. Jake's book seems to be sort of a cutesy spin-off of a field guide, while Alphonso's book seemed more like an academic or instructional book that goes very in-depth into the fundamentals of drawing in pen and ink. But now let's talk about the actual sequence in which the content actually appeared between the two books. Now, I feel like when I was watching the video, a lot of the sequence seemed to flow really naturally and seemed to make sense for why you would talk about a certain principle right after another. In fact, I have a book here called Get Up, Stay Up, which is a sort of graffiti field guide. And in it, near the beginning of the book, they talk about the different supplies involved in graffiti, the standard supplies, and they're included little graphics and drawings of the different supplies. There's also a little graphic that shows the different marks that the different types of tools make. And right after the supplies are shown, they go into how to use the different supplies and how to use your arm to move those supplies, also known as control or can control. Alphonso seemed to be really hung up on a lot of the sequence of content, even though a lot of the content seemed to just be the way that that content would flow naturally within a principle. But when you look at him talking about the 5 applications that Jake brings up within his book and showing how they're split up between 2 different sections within his book, he does this thing that he does a lot throughout the video where he says, but that's probably just Jake trying to make it so the similarity isn't too noticeable. And he does that many, many times throughout the book, and maybe I'll address that more later in the video, but I feel like when Alphonso began to maybe jump down this rabbit hole, he starts to become very convinced that Jake is stealing from him, and then begins to sort of construe his vision to then apply what he's seeing to his belief that he already has and ignore all of the differences that are existing, and basically chalking them up to just Jake trying to hide the fact that he's stealing his content. And there are several differences even in sequence. During Alphonso's video, he's going through this sort of flip through that Jake does very quickly on his Instagram. And throughout the video, Alphonso sometimes has to scroll forward or backwards within his own book. And sometimes it even takes him a few seconds to find the content that is similar between the two. And Alphonso himself acknowledges that as he's looking at this flip through, this very short flip through that Jake does, there's whole chunks of pages that he's actually not seeing. And so we're really not getting an accurate representation of the entire sequence of Jake's book. We're also not getting an accurate representation of all of the content within Jake's book. And I actually want to talk about the content differences between the two books. When we look at the description for Alphonso's book on Amazon, it says that he's going through pen and ink drawing supplies, the fundamentals of drawing, and then also what he calls a secret, the balance of line. But, you know, if you're selling your book on Amazon, it's not a secret. And when we look at the description for Jake's video, there's, yes, the fundamentals of using pen and ink when drawing, but there's also a lot of other things. It includes, or it says it's going to include, some drawing exercises, and also it looks like some of Jake's drawing philosophy and also his philosophy on how to handle art challenges or the discouragement of trying to be an artist or consistently drawing. In the content that Jake chose to show, or maybe accidentally showed in that short flip through, maybe we're missing a lot of the things that Jake is going to include that are very different from Alphonso's book. And the way Alphonso's attitude was shown in his own video, I wonder if Alphonso would also discard this evidence that there are substantial differences between the two books in terms of content, and basically say that Jake was just including those things also to distract from the fact that he's just stealing from Alphonso. At least that's what Alphonso thinks. But that makes me really think, what is unique about Alphonso's book? What is he bringing that is original to art education in terms of his content? And personally, especially because Alphonso is talking about the fundamentals of drawing, a lot of those similarities are almost unavoidable, partly due to the nomenclature of those specific techniques. If someone were to approach me and say, maybe during a critique, not even your anatomy or your perspective, but you specifically need to work on the basic fundamentals of drawing, I wouldn't think to myself, I wonder what they're talking about. It would be the content that has been shown between these two books. Those are just the fundamentals of drawing. And we can look at other courses and other examples, and a lot of people have been sharing a lot of these on Reddit, a lot of old art books. We can even look at this art course, which it's the New Masters Academy, a beginner's guide to drawing. It looks like it's hosted by instructors Bill Perkins and Heather Lanevsky. These are a few of the chapters and in order. Examples of line, contours, and shapes. Form and chiaroscuro demonstrations. Light, shadow, and local values demonstrations. Using and controlling value. Using and controlling value 2. An introduction to major and minor keys. And then they go into talking about still lifes. But even the order of these is similar to the way Alphonso handles them within his own book. And I feel like there are so many other examples. When I was in middle school, I had to take a mandatory drawing course, and I remember that there were a lot of exercises where it was using different mark-making techniques, all with the same names between Jake's book and Alphonso's book. You know, hatching, cross-hatching, scribbling, stippling. Those are the terms for those mark-making techniques. And we would have to create gradient bars. We were learning about value. They were using the same terms such as value control, value gradients, local value. And even in those books, at times, there were cubes where they were applying the texture to those cubes, or spheres where they were applying the texture to those spheres. And again, between Jake's book and Alphonso's book, there are differences between the textures, but Alphonso is chalking it up again to Jake just creating some small differences so he can get away with stealing Alphonso's content. At one point, he even mentions how the gradients go from dark to light instead of light to dark, or vice versa, and how he feels like that's another instance of just Jake creating a small change to avoid being accused of plagiarism. And again, in my intro to drawing courses, we also did a lot of the specific techniques that even Alphonso seems to be using to teach. You know, applying numeric values to the different values of light to dark, and then also trying to get people to draw cubes or complex forms using only 3 of those values, a light, a dark, and a midtone. From my personal experience in art education, I don't feel like Alphonso's content is neither unique nor innovative. Now, it might be original to him. You know, my heart cracked a little when I saw that bucket he had filled with just his work and his planning into how he was going to arrange this book. But I also find it sort of strange that he could be this experienced in art and art teaching and not have run into content that is also similar to his, including exercises and techniques. And there's a lot of terms, and, you know, some of them are slightly different between Jake and Alphonso's book that he gets hung up on. One of the ones he gets the most hung up on is this one instance where it says that you should use varied stroke. You should vary your stroke. And he says that it came to him after a long time of thinking. It took him a substantial amount of time to come up with that word, varied stroke, and that he hadn't heard of it elsewhere. But you can just do a simple Google search, and it's in a lot of articles. In fact, one of the oldest articles that I found that seemed to match up in terms of content was a 2012 Empty Easel article talking about, mark making techniques. And it was talking about cross-hatching, circular strokes, directional strokes, tapping. And within this article, it says you should vary strokes. Now, I don't think it would be crazy that Alphonso hasn't seen this specific article, but I have also in college, we talked about varying strokes to create more appealing designs. And so to me, it just seems sort of unlikely that Alphonso would not have heard or seen exercises and techniques that are similar to the ones within his book besides Jake's book. And that leads me to my concerns with the way this whole thing has been handled, and specifically Alphonso's actions in the whole situation. I want to reiterate that I'm not saying that it's impossible that Jake has plagiarized or Jake's design team has plagiarized from Alphonso's book. If it comes out that Jake says, yes, I need to do an apology, or after an investigation we find out that yes, Jake has plagiarized Alphonso's book, I wouldn't really be surprised. I wouldn't be blown away. You wouldn't find me saying, oh no, that's impossible. But I do find it kind of crazy and dangerous that Alphonso has kind of taken himself as a sort of judge, jury, and executioner in the whole situation. His attitude throughout the video, he's very, very convinced, and he's very direct about his belief that Jake has plagiarized his book. And at the end of his video, he even directly addresses Jake and he says, I'm talking to you. And he doesn't say, Jake, I gotta say, this looks bad. I want to know, did you steal from me? Instead, he says, Jake, I'm talking to you now. I want to know, what made you think you could get away with this? So he is implying that Jake, without a doubt, has plagiarized his book. And throughout the video, in many cases, he sort of attacks Jake specifically as an artist and as an educator, because in many places he says, CC, this is what happens when you don't understand why you're doing this, or you don't understand this. But these are the fundamentals of drawing. And Jake has been teaching drawing before Alphonso published this book. And Jake also has evidence of using the fundamentals successfully and having a grasp on drawing, a very, what I would say, talented grasp on drawing before Alphonso's book was published. You can scroll deep into Jake's Instagram and social media previous to 2015 and find drawings where he is applying textures. He's rendering objects as 3D forms in space, and I'd say with a good grasp on those concepts. And along with this, I also feel like there's a lot of contradictions and things that just seem sort of strange to me in this sort of narrative that's being spun about how or why Jake did plagiarize this book. I mean, on the one hand, you have Alphonso's sort of attacks on Jake as an artist, saying that maybe, he doesn't understand these fundamentals or understand the teaching technique. But Jake has been teaching for a while, and he also attends many events and lectures. That's how I met him. And when you do events and lectures and teach, I feel like at a certain point, you would be outed as a hack, or your inadequacies would be evident. But he seems to be consistently producing art and courses that are helping people learn art, and some of those have come before Alphonso's book was published. And also people are saying that, well, maybe Jake was just lazy. But if that's the case, why would they go through so much effort to make little differences between the two books while also including other content that seems distinct between the two books? Not to mention the fact that Jake also, really close in terms of time, decided to promote Alphonso's book with an affiliate link on his own social media, sharing an exercise from the book and saying that people should check that book out because it is a great resource. It just doesn't make sense to me that Jake would choose to highlight that book and encourage people to buy it if he had stolen from it. I guess if you had to look deep within his social media to see that he was aware of the book, it would be more suspicious to me. But the fact that it's in such a close proximity of the announcement of this book and the display of this book, it just doesn't seem likely to me that that is evidence of him plagiarizing the book. Even in the product description of Jake's book, it says that this book would go along great on the shelf with a few other drawing books and also Alphonso's pen and ink drawing book. If you were going to go to all of the effort to hide the similarities between sections and just make little changes to the syntax of phrases and also the specific word choice of titles and headers, why would you highlight Alphonso's book and also suggest people to buy it and use it and experience his teaching? I don't know, that part just doesn't make sense to me. And that's part of why I guess, to me, Jake's side of the story is also going to be really important to hear. Because while we have been shown Alphonso's side of the story, and we have seen that Alphonso has that bucket of notes and annotations that show he has put in the work to develop this curriculum, Jake hasn't even gotten a chance to show his process for the creation of this book. And I think that's going to be one of the deciding factors in whether or not we can discern whether this book was plagiarized or not. Because to me, logically, just the fact that Alphonso put in a lot of work and developed this book doesn't mean that Jake could not have developed a lot of the ideas and ways of teaching the fundamentals in his own book too. And that's why I think maybe seeing notes or the design files that Jake has, or maybe if he was working with a design team, there should be a record that he had correspondence with that design team. And you could look in the emails and see if there's any references to Alphonso's content or Alphonso as an artist. And that also sort of brings me to the dangers of the way that this is being handled. In my opinion, if Alphonso had come to the realization that he felt that Jake had definitely plagiarized from his book, I feel like the next step to take would be to contact Jake or the publisher, make a serious effort to contact them with his concerns and show the evidence and see if they investigated it and see if they actually responded to him or ignored him, or to get some legal counsel and send a cease and desist order. And if Jake and his publisher team decided to not address that or ignore it and to continue along with the publication, then he would take Jake and the publisher to court to figure out what had happened. And it's hard to tell because from Alphonso's video, it seems like the video might be his first contact to Jake about this issue. He doesn't mention any DMs, he doesn't show any DMs, he doesn't show any email, he doesn't show a cease and desist order. And that could be a big problem, especially because Alphonso is not a small creator. And that is part of the problem with the whole narrative that's being spun up on social media, is there are a lot of people saying, well, look, here's this big white artist who stole from a small black artist. And look at me, I'm white. There is nothing I can do to change that. And so I feel like in terms of race, there are a lot of experiences that I don't have, so I don't really feel like I'm the right person to address those. And so hopefully there's some other voices that will eventually talk about that. But in terms of size of artists, Jake and Alphonso are actually both influencer artists of a similar size. At the time of posting the video, Alphonso had 638,000 YouTube subscribers. Jake had 168,000 YouTube subscribers. Alphonso had 169,000 Instagram followers, and Jake had 577,000 Instagram followers. And so when you look at the ratios, it's basically the same. In fact, if you were to combine those followers between the two platforms, Alphonso actually has a larger following than Jake does. Which again just makes me think it's strange that Alphonso wouldn't be aware of the standard procedures for this sort of situation of protecting your art. And also that he wouldn't consider the fact that he has so many fans who really, really stan him, who love him, who follow him, who have been influenced by him, who would then go and attack this book publication by Jake and his publisher. And while Alphonso didn't explicitly tell his fans to go and do this to Jake in the book, I feel like he would have to know, with his extensive amount of experience on the platform, that this would happen. And now that this has happened, there has been a substantial amount of damage done to the launch of this book. And also, the idea of Jake as an artist. His reputation has been tarnished by this thing that is going viral on social media. And these statements haven't yet gotten a legitimate investigation with evidence provided by both sides. A lot of people are acting like because Alphonso said that Jake has plagiarized his book and he gave some of the reasons that he saw, it is objectively true, and that nothing that Jake could say could ever, counter that, which may not be true. When we look at Jake, he's not just a nobody, and he has a very long history on the internet and in education. So if a serious investigation or an actual discussion ever occurs, and Jake ends up coming with a response, it could come out that Jake did not actually plagiarize his book. And Jake might actually have evidence he has a lot of ways to source evidence. You've got to think, if he's been teaching, I think he's been a professor, then he has syllabus from many years, or syllabi, and he has lesson plans. He has slideshows and notes from his many, many lectures. He has the online courses that he built. And if they can look at those and see that he's using the specific terminology, he's using similar sequences and similar, techniques, and also exercises previous to being exposed to or the publication of Alphonso's book, it would be very deteriorating to what Alphonso showed us in his case. So unless Alphonso has some sort of an ace in the hole, maybe he has a contact at Jake's publisher, or he has an email, some sort of proof that shows that Jake was referencing or using content specifically from his book, I feel like Alphonso's case may not stand up. And now that has become even more risky and problematic for Alphonso considering the situation, because now Alphonso's fans have damaged Jake and the launch of this book. And now there is a measured monetary effect from the people who have been canceling their pre-orders, from the many, many comments and posts on social media that, they're out there. They're out there now. Jake could bring that to a court and say, look at all these examples of people saying, I'm not going to support Jake anymore. I'm not going to buy this book anymore. I'm not going to participate in Inktober anymore. Which means that if Alphonso's case doesn't stand, it's not just going to be that was a misunderstanding. Now I feel like Jake could actually have a case, if Alphonso's case doesn't stand, for defamation. He could be showing that Alphonso's actions, if they were slander, incurred a monetary and reputation loss that were not justified and were unethical. And again, I'm not saying that Alphonso doesn't truly believe this. And I'm not saying that Jake should not be investigated. What I'm saying is I feel like there hasn't been enough of investigation yet, and the cancel culture that is arising from the situation is maybe going to cause more problems for Alphonso in the future. I'm just a little worried. Me personally, what I'd like to believe and what I'd hope for is that it was just a miscommunication, that these were two talented artists who were both passionate about teaching and both wanted to take their own route that coincidentally had some similarities. But that may not be the case. And it might come out that, maybe Alphonso was intentionally ignoring some things, or it may come out that, yes, Jake did steal from Alphonso. But now I feel like there's a lot of complications that should not have existed, and there could have been a better way of handling this. And I'm a little disappointed in a lot of the artists that I see on social media who seem to be either blindly supporting Jake or blindly supporting Alphonso. And I think it's kind of a dangerous attitude to have in our art community, and I feel like there have been a lot of toxic interactions and just things, a lot of bad things have happened in 2020, but also I feel like I've over and over again been seeing things that make me kind of disappointed or not proud of the art community, and this is one of those events. And so I'm interested to hear what you think. I'm interested to see where this goes. Do you think I'm dumb? Do you agree with Jake? Do you agree with Alphonso. What's your reasoning? Are there things that you're suspicious of or think are strange on both sides? Do you just think I'm a big fat racist? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I'm also learning, and I don't know everything about the situation, and I'm honestly interested to see where this goes, and I am a little bit worried about Alphonso, considering what his fans have done to the launch of that book. And some people say they feel it's necessary, but I feel like if Alphonso was going to take legal action, if the book had launched, Jake is an established artist, that publisher is an established publisher, there would be, records of the sales for tax purposes. He could have sued for damages if it turns out that Jake did plagiarize. But now, it seems like his fans have all joined in and might have really made things a lot hairier than they should have been. So, let me know what you think. You can like or dislike this video. You're free to do either one. Maybe subscribe if you like what you see or want to help support me, because I'm also just growing as an artist, as a designer, and on the platform. So thank you for watching the video all the way if you did, and I hope to see you again. Take care.
You're such a